Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from long ago of newspaper articles in the public domain, so we can take a look at the entire article, and we look at them with our modern perspective and see what we can learn from them. I find that there's a lot to learn from the past. So on this week's Microfiche Time Capsule, we're looking at an article in the London Magazine from August 1768 entitled Rules Prescribed for Translating It. And I apologize for the shortness of that. If you look at the top of the page, it says Rules Observed in the Translation of the Bible. The reason it isn't more specific before is because the previous article is on the translators of the Bible. So I'm assuming this is for the King James Version, which is a list of people who I don't know. So it means nothing to me. I didn't think that that would be terribly interesting since nobody knows them anyway, but that they actually had certain rules that they had to follow while translating the Bible, and I thought that was fascinating. So let's take a look at the rules that the Bible translators had to follow. So the rules to be observed in the translation of the Bible. Number 1. The ordinary Bible, read in the church, commonly called the Bishop's Bible, to be followed, and as little altered as the truth of the original will permit. Okay, the Bishop's Bible is an English translation of the Bible which was produced under the authority of the established Church of England in 1568. It was substantially revised in 1572, and the 1602 edition was prescribed as the base text for the King James Bible that was completed in 1611. Yeah. So they used this Bishop's Bible as a base. Makes sense to me. They have to get their base somewhere. Number 2, the names of the prophets and the holy writers with the other names of the text to be retained as nigh as may be, according as they were vulgarly used. So don't change the spellings, please. There are a lot of alternative spellings. In fact, if you read the Hebrew Bible and then next to the, meaning the Old Testament, next to the New Testament, which is the Greek Bible, and you put them next to each other, there are a few of the names that were spelled differently. In the Greek, I believe they call Rachel Rahel, which makes sense because the CH in Hebrew is a ch, so it's Rachel. And so, like, calling it a Rachel is actually too harsh in English, so, Rahel is actually closer. Just saying. So that's just one example, but they also spelled Jonah differently and a couple others, but they tried very hard to keep the spellings the same, is what it sounds like. That was one of the rules. Number 3, the old ecclesiastical words to be kept, viz. The word church not to be translated congregation, etc. Okay, that makes sense. There are lots of variations of a very similar word, so they're trying to keep the words as uniform as possible. Number 4, when a word hath diverse significations, that to be kept which hath been most commonly used by the most of the ancient fathers, being agreeable to the propriety of the place and the analogy of the faith. Sorry, I had to read that 3 times to understand what it was saying. Yeah, so they're saying that they want to use the words that were most often used. Okay, that makes sense. So if there are, similar to the number 3, when they say don't use congregation when everywhere else you're using church. Same with other words. You don't want to change the word. Use the one that's most commonly used. Okay. Number 5, the division of the chapters to be altered either not at all or as little as may be if necessity so require. Okay. Don't change the chapters that are already split. It kind of has some natural breaks. Okay, number 6, no marginal notes at all to be affixed, but only for the explanation of the Hebrew or Greek words, which cannot without some circumlocution so briefly and fitly be expressed in the text. So don't add notes to the text. I think that was something that was fairly common at the time, where they wanted to interpret the scriptures for everybody who was reading it, and sometimes a certain priest would have very strong opinions that it should be interpreted in a certain way, But what they wanted was just a pure translation. They didn't want notes of interpretation. They just wanted to know exactly what it said. This is what it sounds like. Unless there were vocabulary problems where it wasn't 100% clear. Like, for example, the word talent used in the New Testament was a measure of money, which it is no longer used today. So, like that, for example, might be notated. Other things, no. Number 7. Such quotations of places to be marginally set down and shall serve for the reference of one scripture to another. I'm not sure what that means. Like, do they mean like chapter and verse? Like, Hebrews chapter 5, verse 12, or whatever it is. Is that what they mean? Quotations of places to be marginally set down, as shall serve for reference of one scripture to another. Yeah, I think that's what that means. So that they also have verses, like verse numbers, so they can reference that scripture somewhere else. Chapter 8. Every particular man of each company to take the same chapter or chapters, and having translated or amended them severally by himself, where he thinketh good, all to meet together, confer what they have done, and agree for their parts what shall stand. That makes sense to me. So everybody would go, like their group, their committee, which looked to be about 6 to 8 people per group. They would take the chapters they were working on. Each would go separately in separate rooms, translate their chapters, all come back together, and then they'd compare what they had done and decide which one was the best. That's quite an efficient system, actually. I'm not sure if that's used today, but that's quite efficient. My hat's off to you. As any one company hath dispatched any one book in this manner, they shall send it to the rest, to be considered of seriously and judiciously, for his majesty is very careful in this point. Okay, so they're actually having more than one committee translate the same chapters. That's interesting. So then once one group would agree on something, the other group would agree on something, then they would send it to each other. That is also very efficient. I'll bet you had the best possible one at the end of the day. Number 10. If any company, upon the review of the book so sent, doubt or differ upon any place, to send them word thereof, note the place, and withal send the reasons, to which if they consent not, the difference to be compounded at the general meeting, which is to be of the chief persons of each company at the end of the work. Alright, so at the end, so if ever there was a spot where they didn't agree, that they would make a note of it, and then at the end, the chiefs of all of the committees would go and meet together, and then they would confer on which version is the best. Okay. Number 11. When any place of special obscurity is doubted of, letters to be directed by authority to send to any learned man in the land for his judgment of such a place. Interesting. So if ever there was a spot where they said, what does this mean? And they needed some expert help, that they were allowed to send for it. That's good. Number 12. Letters to be sent from every bishop to the rest of his clergy, admonishing them of this translation in hand, and to move and charge as many as being skillful in the tongues, and having taken pains of that kind, to send his particular observations to the company, either at Westminster, Cambridge, or Oxford. Okay, so the bishops of the area had a say in it, I guess? They're like, oh, I want to put in my 2 cents, as long as they were good at languages, so they had to be fluent in Hebrew or Greek, or both. Unless they were looking at Latin, I'm not sure. Number 13. The directors in each company to be the deans of Westminster and Chester for that place, and the king's professors of the Hebrew or Greek in either university. So the deans of the colleges were like the heads of the committees. Number 14. These translations to be used when they agree better with the text than the bishop's Bible. For example, Tisdale's, Matthew's, Coverdale's, Whitchurch's, or Geneva. So they're actually allowed to look at other translations if they find them better than the one they were basing it on. It's also very smart. Okay. And number 15, besides the said directors before mentioned, 3 or 4 of the most ancient and grave divines in either of the universities not employed in translating to be aligned with the vice-chancellor upon conference with the rest of the heads to be overseers of the translations, as well as Hebrew as Greek, for the better observation of the 4th rule above specified, e.g. Interesting. So they're choosing someone well-versed in classics, I take it, or biblical studies, possibly, religious studies, something like that. I'm sure they had all of those at Westminster, Cambridge, and Oxford. So they were kind of the overseers of the whole project. That's interesting. I think that they definitely used a lot of people. Like, there were a lot of people involved in that translation of the Bible, the King James Version. I feel like there was a lot of effort that went into it, and a lot of very careful observation, checking things over 3, 4, 5, 6 times to make sure they got it exactly right and they didn't make any mistakes. So I have to say that was a very, very careful translation, so my hat's off to you. Respect. I do enjoy the King James Version of the Bible, I still do. I enjoy the language, even though it's antiquated today. I find that it's soothing in a way. It's comforting. Yeah, that's my opinion. So I hope we learned something about the translation of the Bible. I found that fascinating. And thank you for joining me today on Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, once again. And feel free to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video.